be seated. The next session is going to start in a couple of minutes. So yeah, thank you.
Forum of Hindu College. Kautilya School of Public Policy presents the 4th edition of Campus 2023. I am Harshita Pandey, a first year student from History Honours, and this year marks the 125th anniversary of Hindu College and 15 years of caucus since its inception. Invited guests, teachers and fellow friends, today we have gathered here to have a moderated session on the topic breaking the glass ceiling and moving towards an inclusive society. A term coined by a feminist, Marilyn Loden, back in 1978, a glass ceiling is a metaphor usually applied to women used to represent an invisible barrier that prevents them from rising beyond a certain level. No matter how it is expressed, it is a very difficult obstacle to overcome. They are like invisible barriers that need to be crossed. And in today's time, we have to work together to shatter those glass ceilings, which is restricting the ascent of these ambitious women, who can certainly perform way better if they are freed from these shackles. With immense pleasure, I would like to introduce to you the person who started it all, Mrs. Mitali Nikore, the founder director of Caucus, the Militant Arm of Hindu College. One of the leading economists and public policy makers, Mrs. Mitali Nikore completed her graduation from the Hindu College and thereafter went to the London School of Economics. You have worked with esteemed multilateral organizations such as Asian Development Bank, the World Bank, and the United Nations. Mrs. Mitali Nikore is a gender policy specialist and is also the founder of the youth-led research group Nikore Associates. You are also an advisor to the steering committee BRICS CCI leaders and a writer with prominent news agencies like Times of India, Indian Express, and She the People. You have been named as one of the top industry leaders by Forbes magazine, and you have provided your expertise on air on multiple news segments on BBC News, Indian Express, and NDTV amongst others. Now, I would like to request the moderators, Shreya Mahajan and Aditya Tomar, to kindly escort Mrs. Mitali Nikore onto the stage and begin this much awaited section.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for being with us. We are blessed to have you at Campus 23, presents by Kautilya Academy for Public Policy. I, Aditya Tomar, and my friend Shreya Mahajan are moderators of this discussion. We have Mitali Nikore, ma'am, with us to share her insights on the topic, breaking the glass ceiling, moving towards an inclusive society. In this session, we will be having a 45 minutes of moderated discussion, will be followed by audience with Q&A. So, ma'am, without any delay, we would like to begin the discussion with your due permission. So, ma'am, my first question is: inclusivity has always proven to be efficacious in ameliorating workplaces and society as a whole, which is also why glass ceiling should be broken. One of the numerous ways to achieve this could be women leaders encouraging and paving path for other women's success journey. So, ma'am, being such an inspiration yourself, who reaches out to many and work for such causes, what is your take on this?
First of all, thank you so much. Thank you for having me here today. I think it's always nostalgic for me to return to Hindu, because obviously one has spent and created so many memories in this college. I can tell you that my best friend, even today, almost 10 years since we passed out of the college, actually more, is still from Caucus. He and I are still the best friends. And when I was coming, I said, you know, today I'm going to Hindu. He said, every 3 months you're going to Hindu. I said, sure, why not? They keep inviting me, I'll keep coming. So for me, this is always a priority, and I just want to say that Caucus has not only given me, you know, professional success, because obviously it makes you more confident. What you're doing today, it's going to help you 10 years later, you don't even know how. It's literally just the memory of, you know, the muscle memory of sitting on stage and doing what you're doing.
Yes, ma'am.
It makes it easier. But Caucus has given me, of course, some of my most cherished memories, best friends, and lasting friendships throughout my life. So that's just a big thank you to all of you for keeping it going. Congratulations on putting such a phenomenal, you know, event together. Campus 2023 is bigger than what we've seen before. So thank you so much for doing that. And to your whole Caucus team, brilliant work.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
So now coming to our topic and your question. At the end of the day, I think we have to first contextualize where does India stand on gender equality. And I think that's the first conversation all of us need to be having in this room, because I am so happy to have so many men and boys in this room today. Yesterday I was at Gargi and we were having a similar conversation, and I said, you know, it's very important for all the women in the audience to feel very, very confident, because many a times when they are going for interviews, when they are being you know, selected for these jobs, the jibe that comes from their male colleagues, and this affects your confidence, right? The jibe is, oh, tum to diversity hire. Or you are here because now there's a mandate from the top to have diversity and to have that, you know, to have sufficient representation of women. But why is it that all of us in the sector and as you know, leaders in our own organizations fighting to have more and more women in leadership? It's because it has been proven that women leaders are not only equally effective but more effective than men at hiring, at handling certain situations. You know, the empathy factor, the social, you know, sort of skills that they have, the soft skills that women leaders have, it has been acknowledged that they actually outperform male leaders on a number of parameters. So in your team, you always want to have a combination. You want to have somebody who's a great coder, for example, but then you also want to have somebody who's a great writer who can actually write that code into a language that more people can understand. So that is the same thing when we talk about leadership, that you want people in leadership and senior management to be good at multiple things, and hence diversity is critical. Now, having said that, as I said, you know, let's take a step back and look at where India stands on gender equality. India's labour force participation rate, starting from the 1950s to 2017-18, has shown a continuous decline. But in the last 5 years, we have started to see an increase. We have to decode what is driving first the decline and then the increase, and then tailor our policies accordingly. So I'll shed light more on this as we, you know, go through the questions, but my basic response is we need women in leadership and diversity to bring out the largest productivity and to improve the overall deliverables of whatever a single team produces, an organization produces, and what we produce as an economy.
Ma'am, if you are talking about this, then question arises, how else can we strive towards breaking this barrier at both individual and organizational levels?
So I think that's a very critical question, and it again brings me back to what we were just discussing. that India's female labor force participation rate has been declining continuously from the 1950s to 2017-18. Just a thought, if we were to go by 2017-18 female labor force participation rates, nearly 75% of the women who are sitting in this audience will just graduate but not join the workforce. That situation has now changed in the last 5 years, to the extent that when we look at the urban female postgraduate labor force participation rate, it's nearly half. So then that still means that half of the women sitting here today may not last very long in the labor force. They may join, they may take up a job, but they may not last very long. And what is it that actually leads to this? Even today, in our segment, right, in this urban postgraduate segment where women do have access to support services and do have access to jobs. In fact, companies are coming and saying we want more diversity, right? So they have inordinate amount of access to jobs. The issue comes with unpaid work. The expectation, even today, and I'm sure that there are men in this audience, though they may not say it out loud if I ask them, will be looking for, wives and will be relying on their mothers even today to do a lot of their unpaid work for them. And this is changing in urban areas. This is hopefully and thankfully changing, but it's not fast enough. When we look at the data for 2019, we actually find that women are doing 8.4 times the amount of unpaid work that men are doing. So on average, women are doing almost 6 hours of unpaid work and men are only doing 30 minutes. So how do we break the glass ceiling when one person who needs to be breaking this glass ceiling is just sitting at home completing all of the chores that need to get done? So to break this glass ceiling, we need to first understand what is the constraint on the workforce side, on the women's side. What is the stereotype that is still being held by men? And what is it that companies can do? Because companies can do a lot, but they will not until they are legally mandated to do so. And therefore, what is it that governments and policymakers can do? It's only when the interests of all four stakeholders align that you can actually see a change in the glass ceiling.
Thank you, ma'am, for that answer. Now, we see that when it comes to social issues, it is very important to lay emphasis on their origin and their causation. Now, Marilyn Loden coined the term glass ceiling nearly 5 decades ago and has recently re-emphasized its ongoing relevance. We see that lowered self-esteem and institutional barriers act as a demotivating factor and also change the way that women look at their career aspirations. So what is your take on this, and do you think that there is even enough awareness of the very concept glass ceilings?
So, this is a very important point you've just raised of awareness. And I think that even as women, we are not aware of what could we experience. So I'd like to relate a little personal sort of narrative and anecdote. A friend of mine recently, she joined a company and she got married in 2020, and her husband happens to be a professor at IIM Indore, and she herself holds a PhD from an American university. So we are talking about extremely privileged, highly educated couple, right? Both of them have a PhD, and the husband is a professor. So she joins, this company and she's working with them, it's all going well, until it's time for them to have a baby. At which point, she's, in her mid-30s, she's being told by her doctors that she needs to take time off because her health is, needs care and she needs to take care of herself. And she cannot deliver the kind of deadlines and timelines and etc. that her company expects her to. So now she's in a situation. She has to choose. Do I start a family or do I prioritize my career? And her whole life, she has prioritized her career. Right? Because she holds a PhD and every time she has sacrificed so much to get that PhD. So what should she do now? What should she do, right? Can I dictate her choice or can you? No. She has to choose. The problem is that she has to choose. The entire issue is that in this situation she has no choice but to choose one or the other. And that is the crux of the challenge that we are facing. If we can design workplaces, if we can design institutions that recognize that she has to take a lighter work schedule, that recognize that she has to work according to her health, and she is willing to take a pay cut for that, obviously. She's not going to say, oh, please pay me 100%. I'm working 20-30% of the time, let me keep my job, but I can do a work sharing arrangement with someone. These are very normal arrangements, especially which can happen in a highly specialized gig economy kind of workforce. But they are not available in India. And that's where we have to make a change. We have to make a change in how we view workplaces, how we view people's productivity, how we accommodate. We are actually not accommodating. That company has lost out on her talent because they could not adapt to her needs. I would say we have to change it, right? Typically we would say, oh, she was not able to meet the requirements of her employer. But I would say her employer was not able to adapt their work systems to retain a talent like her. And I think at this time when you're talking about such highly qualified, specialized people, workplaces have to make it easier for them to come in. And at that level, everybody would be that skilled.
Like you rightly pointed out that indeed there is not enough awareness about the very concept. How do you think the upcoming generations and even the people who are here at the moment, the attendees, how can we in general in society make people more aware about it, sensitize them about the very concept of plastic?
So I think, with this generation, there's a lot of work that has already been done. But of course, there's a lot that still needs to be done. And very honestly, what I find is that I think when you're entering a workplace, the bias levels are definitely much lower in this generation. The bias levels will start increasing when you're at a more senior level and you start experiencing that unconscious bias. So there is an important narrative that has to start from colleges, from schools, that at the end of the day, there is, domestic work is not one person's work. Domestic work is everybody's work. It's household work. It's not your mother's work or your wife's work or your sister's work. It's everyone's work. So I think that narrative, until it's sort of perpetuated by companies, will continue to be a challenge. And I think it serves the interest of companies to perpetuate this narrative of, a woman who can have it all. Oh, she can do everything. She's a superstar. She can do 12 hours of office work and then 12 hours of housework. And I think we have to reject, I think it's this generation which can truly reject that narrative and say, you know what, this is nonsense. This is unacceptable. We are human. There's only so much work we can do in a day. And there's only so much domestic work that we can do in a day as well. And I think women of this generation have to become more demanding. I love the body positivity of Gen Z. Honestly, like when I see Gen Zs in a cafe or a restaurant, and with just how they carry themselves, they are so confident about their body. We all had body issues when we were growing up, so I'm just like, this is amazing. The way you guys have done that, just do the same for workplace norms. Just question it, don't accept it. And say, you know what, why are you giving me this? I have to go home in the evening and take care of my sick mother. Or I have to take care of my, of my family. And boys should be saying that. Ideally, it should not be just the girls saying that. Because at the end of the day, your manager, when they are assigning projects, will say, oh, nahi, ye main isko nahi de sakta because she can't go to this area alone. I'll have to put 2 resources instead of 1. And that's the kind of thinking that has to be questioned and say, no, so what if you have to put 2 resources? You will get a gender lens if you put 2 resources. So if it might be even 1 resource more, that's fine, but you'll get a holistic perspective. How can you improve an area without women enjoying that area completely? So I think it's very important for women in this generation to reclaim public spaces, to loiter in public spaces, to question norms on unpaid work. And that's the way in which we can break the glass ceiling once and for all.
My third question is, recent times have witnessed budding entrepreneurs, but at the same time, figure dictate that women make up only 14% of total entrepreneurs in India. So what do you think are the major reasons for such a low representation of women in top leadership roles?
So the first reason is that data was published in 2015-16. The 14% figure comes from the Ministry of MSME's annual report, 2015-16, as per the economic survey data, which has never been updated. So you don't have a wrong figure. Your figure is fine. It's just that the number has not been updated. So we really need a new census of unincorporated informal enterprises, which is officially done by the Ministry of Statistics Program Implementation, Government of India. The first thing is to do a new study so that we can have more accurate figures and data of women's entrepreneurship. At this point in time, the data itself is outdated that the government is publishing. So that's the first reason. So, one is that. My personal estimate, like what I would guesstimate, is that at least 35 to 40% of all enterprises in India are run by women, especially in the informal and micro sector. Because you have so many self-help groups now across the country registered under the National Rural Livelihood Mission, which are not reflected currently in the data. So the problem is a little bit more methodological. Now, the second issue is how can we encourage more and more women to become entrepreneurs, become startup founders, right? And the way to do that is to ease all of the constraints that are stopping women from really taking up entrepreneurship. The first one we've already talked about is unpaid care work. But the second one is really about access to finance. Despite the fact that women-led enterprises have a higher profitability than male-led enterprises, in study after study it has been shown. Yet, women-led enterprises are less likely to get finance when they go to any banker. Why? Because of lack of asset ownership. They don't own the land, they can't give any mortgage, they can't get a loan. If you can't get a loan, you can't start a business. So this itself is one of the biggest challenges. Unpaid work I've already talked about. And third is mentorship. When you are a startup founder, anybody, my husband is a startup founder. So I can tell you, he can't do it alone. You need somebody who you can go to for ideas, for mentorship, for guidance. Now, if all of your mentors are going to be male, And there are social norms that preclude women from freely interacting with men, especially in tier 2, tier 3 and these cities which are actually driving the innovation and the entire startup wave right now. Then how are you going to encourage women entrepreneurs? Just think about it. If you are in a smaller city, I'm sure many of you are coming not from South Delhi, right? You're sitting here coming from other cities of India. So I'm sure you are aware much more than me about the social norms that dictate women's mobility and movement. If you can't step out of your house at 6 p.m. when your mentor is going to be available and go for a meeting with them because it's too unsafe for you to be walking in your city, then how are you going to start a business? And how are you going to access markets? So any kind of entrepreneurship activity requires a lot of freedom. The freedom to think, the freedom to innovate, the freedom to move and make those connections, build on those markets, learn about what is the need of the market that needs to be solved. And if women don't have that freedom, they are not going to be capable of becoming entrepreneurs.
So, since we've now talked about low women representation in entrepreneurial jobs, I would now like to focus on low female representation in the parliament. So in 2019, India, which is the largest democracy, it ranked 149 out of 193 countries in a ranking which was created for the percentage of women representation in national parliament. Now, this isn't exactly surprising because we have about 10% or 11% of females, 10% or 11% of the members in parliament are females. Now, we see that even though there has been a bill which has been initiated in the parliament, the bill is yet to be passed. In this case, why do you think this low representation continues to happen, and what are the repercussions of this low representation when it comes to gender-sensitive policies?
So I think we should talk about a natural experiment here, which is the reservation of panchayat seats for women, right? We have a policy in place, we have a law in place that 1/3 of panchayat seats have to be for women, sarpanch. And we have also seen the preponderance of sarpanch patis, right? Like basically we all have seen shows on Amazon Prime about it. And we all have seen sometimes in real life also, where you have the men who are the husbands of these women sarpanches actually running their own parallel administration. Now, these kind of instances give more, impetus to those who oppose reservation for women, in the parliament or in political parties. I think more than reservation, yes, okay, if we get reservation, we'll definitely have more women in one go, right? Because then you're mandated to have reservation. But on the other hand, if political parties, if we look at a political party as an employer, a political party is also an employer, right? You give them your labor and they give you something in return. They may not pay you in return, but they give you something. If your political party is an employer, then why is it that they don't have their own strategies in place to enhance diversity? And it's not just about gender diversity. It's about diversity of representation in their leadership. To be fair, political parties like the BJP have done a phenomenal job with gender diverse representation as well as representation of different regions and creating very, very strong leaders from across the country despite the senior leadership being centered here. We need other political parties to also do that and have more and more focus on gender diversity. So the diversity is not just a prerogative of the parliament or having a law in place for representation, but also of the parties making that effort themselves.
Ma'am, the next question is, in one of your writings you have mentioned about how digital literacy and digital economy can aid women economic empowerment. Could you please elucidate the same for the audience here?
So honestly, my belief is that having analyzed the reasons for declining female labor force participation over the last 50 years, and then looking at the projection for the next 50 years. So for the last 50 years, what have been the reasons, right? We talked about some of them. One is, of course, unpaid work. One is access to finance. Another is education and skill gaps. To some extent, that issue of gender-based educational and skill gaps is getting addressed. And in India is definitely reducing considerably, even in STEM sectors. So I would say that that's the least, threat, smallest threat to low female labor force participation persisting in the future. Unpaid work continues to be a threat. Mobility is also a threat. At the end of the day, the fact that you don't have safe cities, you don't have, safe public transport, you don't have inclusive infrastructure, that's a threat. But the biggest reason why women will continue to lose jobs and may find it difficult to get employment in the next decade is the digital divide. At this stage, the most valuable skill a college graduate can bring to an internship or to a job is their knowledge of AI tools, right? I don't know how to operate ChatGPT, but I want my interns to know so that I don't have to learn it, right? That is the most valuable skill that any graduates can bring. And if women are not even allowed to access mobile phones without, the oversight of male relatives, which is the situation in many, many areas of our country, then how are they going to be employable? What kind of jobs are they going to get? It will continue to be labor-intensive, low-wage employment, which is gradually going to get replaced with machines. Even in services sector, a lot of automation is coming, and people who have highly adapted skill sets are the ones who are going to get the next set of jobs to work with these technology tools. So what we really need is for women to have the training of this digital literacy, to have the training of these tech tools in order to retain employment.
Ma'am, given the backdrop of post-pandemic recovery in marketplaces, research on women economic empowerment statistics in India indicates that the present contribution of women to the GDP remains at only 17%, while they constitute almost 50% of the population. It is also established that the government aims to enhance the digital economy's contribution to 20% of the GDP in the next 5 years. Given this context, do you think the government is looking forward to incorporating these factors when it has to work in this field?
No, definitely in our line of work, we have only seen support for gender equality from all government organizations and agencies. There's a clear commitment for women-led development even in Atmanirbhar Bharat. So definitely, this is definitely a priority, policy priority for all governments that I have ever interacted with.
Coming to the last question for the moderated session. In most societies, we see that the LGBTQI plus communities have faced alienation and unjust ostracization. Their demands have only been brought into the mainstream with the legalization of their political status, and even then we see that there is some social taboos that they are still subjected to. Now, when it comes to inclusivity, especially in Indian societies, there are so many social inequalities that exist and they act as barriers for collective growth. We understand that it is important for us to have legal provisions, laws and policies for the upliftment of such communities, but still there is no social acceptance, there is still a level of social acceptance which is missing. So given this context, how do you think this narrative can be changed and made better?
I just feel very hesitant to comment on the issues of LGBTQIA communities because I don't belong to the community, and I feel like this question is better answered by someone who deserves a voice in that community.
Right. So in general, in society, we still see that there are some policies, even gender-sensitive policies or policies that are meant for the upliftment of women, specifically, that aren't exactly incorporated as well as they were intended to when they were initiated. So in such a scenario, we see that the mentality of people acts as a barrier. So how can this be countered and improved?
Yeah, no, I'll give you an example of this. I actually was reading in the paper just this morning that there is an ancient law in Himachal Pradesh which continues to exist, according to which women, when their husbands or their fathers pass away, unless they have a written will, like let's say that the father is not able to make a written will, unless they have a written will, the property of the father automatically passes on to the nearest male relative. And the women do not stand to inherit anything. And it actually gave the example of a lot of women whose fathers and husbands owned agricultural land. But for some reason, when they passed away, the agricultural land was passed on to, say, their uncle or to, their brothers-in-law, and they are now impoverished, they have nothing. And they have actually written to the President of India requesting for a change in this law. So this example completely relates with your question, right? That how do you change the mindsets when policies, laws, regulations, they are set in such a way that, they just keep on perpetuating this gender inequality. I mean, we are in 2023 and we are still passing on properties to the nearest male relative. It makes absolutely zero sense. And that's where we need to do a lot more research, bring out such examples to the fore and campaign around them for that change. That is the only way to do it. And again, it comes down to having more representation of women in political parties, because then it is more likely that they will take up these issues and that they will highlight them.
Ma'am, before we move on to the questions from the audience, are there any closing remarks that you would want to give for this entire discussion? We can have audience questions now, so if there's anyone from the audience who wants to ask a question, kindly raise your hand.
Greetings, ma'am. My question to you was, by definition, glass ceiling means that it's an invisible barrier that prevents women from getting to a better position in a hierarchy. When we're talking about the workforce, we need to develop some sort of skills in order to get to a better place in the hierarchy. So what can we students, apart from AI, can do in order to break that ceiling?
Thank you for that question. So are we going to take all questions together or? Okay, great. So I think the most important skill that I would recommend for all the students today is research. It's very, very important to strengthen your research skills, whichever field you are. If you are in economics, whether you're in sociology or any of the humanities, or even in the sciences, the research skills are most critical, because at this point in time you have a lot of research tools available to you. Earlier it was just Google, now you have many. And it's very, very critical that you're able to get the research from a number of sources, be able to distinguish which one is a genuine source, which one is not, and then put together the information in a coherent manner, right? So the research and the depth of the research, keep on questioning the research question in that sense, and saying, no, but do I have enough? But do I have enough, Because I've seen it with my interns, it's often first 3 links on Google and here is your research, sort of done. That's not sufficient. We need people who can really question the research brief and say, okay, can I add one more aspect to this? Can I, put these 5 more keywords into Google or into whichever tool I'm using and bring out a properly researched document? So, the first is that. So therefore, I would say research is no longer about just Googling. It's about knowing what you're looking for. So that thought process has to come in. The second, I would say, is writing. It's very, very important to write succinctly. It's very important to write with clear takeaways. We don't need people who can fill pages. That, even academic writing is not about filling pages. It's about saying, you know what, I want to communicate these 4 points. And I can communicate these 4 points in 800 words, in 1000 words, or even in 200 words. But having that skill, the writing skill, is critical. And the third, I would say, is communication. And writing is part of communication, but communication is wider. It's about social media. It's about using different types of media tools to communicate your research. And also looking at other communication tools, for example, presentations. How can you graphically present your data, your information, your research, your ideas? So putting all of these 3 together, research, writing, and communications, is what brings you to a point where, yes, now I can actually convince somebody to take a look at what at my point. Because there's so much information in the world out there today that there's an information overload. So your overall skill is how do I distinguish my thoughts, my ideas from everybody else's.
That answers your question. Thank you, ma'am.
As we come to the end of this session, ma'am, we'd like to thank you for this discussion. It certainly allowed us to have a wider and more elaborate understanding about glass ceilings and how we can create an inclusive society. Now, I'd like to ask Harshita to conclude.
With this, we now come to the end of this wonderful session. I would like to thank you on behalf of Caucus MAP. It was indeed an honor for all of us, the entire Hindu College, to have you with us today. Now I would like to call upon Ms. Mudita Mishra, the Vice President of Caucus, to felicitate Mrs. Mitali Nikore. My sincere thanks to all for your presence and patience. Thank you.